Hey everyone, welcome to episode 153 of Fight Chat Friday. So, this is a follow on from last week's episode 152, where we gave you 6 critical things that you need to be able to do to compete at a high level in ITF sparring. So, today, again, working on that kind of a theme of if you had to restrict things and really focus your attention down, what would you be doing? So, we're going to look at 10 areas that you need to be very proficient in ITF sparring, and areas and scenarios you need to train to make it to the high level that you need to be at.
Yeah, and like as we're talking about these, I kind of see these as the kind of themes that you structure your sparring around. If you want to be really efficient and make sure that every session has value that's going to translate into the actual game of sparring, you need to be incorporating these 10 areas into the scenarios, the themes, the kind of the whole point of the training session needs to focus around these to some degree. And when we talk about scenarios, Richie, we're always talking about like almost like a microcosm of sparring, some element of sparring that we're going to focus on or try to develop, and in particular the decision making around that. So if we look at the first one, maybe you can lead us off with the idea of adaptability or having the ability to adapt in your sparring.
Yeah, so we spoke about last week why that's important. So go check that out if you haven't seen that one. It will give you a lot of context. But here we're looking at how you can have active rounds between you and a training partner where you
Yeah.
have to adapt. Maybe that's because of a scenario that happens in the match. Maybe somebody scores a certain technique and then you have to do something else. So, like, we're looking at implementing rounds really where your partners must switch between various tactics, emphasizing some adaptability there, really, and also switching maybe from an attacking front or maybe a counter attacking kind of mindset, and switching styles of maybe the techniques that you also use. So that will help you then to be able to have that skill and that mindset of being able to change and adapt depending on the circumstances that you see in front of you, which is a very, very important skill that you need to be training yourself in.
I think anytime you set a constraint and you tell a person you can do this or you can't do this, it forces them to adapt to a new opponent. And even the whole idea of sparring opponents of different skill or with different preferences is a huge part of this as well. That the person isn't constantly encountering the same sidekick from their best buddy that they always spar with, but instead is, meeting different front leg entries or meeting someone who doesn't want to enter with legs or takes a half facing stance rather than side facing. These things are hugely important. So ensuring that your sparring training presents problems that your students are going to have to solve, or that you yourself are going to have to solve, very, very, very important. The next one that we're looking at is this thing of high value combinations or setups. And I think this is almost a mindset change as well, because what we're looking to do is create scenarios where we're not encouraging point stop. We're not encouraging people to take the most efficient single scoring technique and run. Like that has its value sometimes, but we really want people to be able to look at maximizing their scoring potential. And that means if you've done all of the hard work to make an entry and get a score, there's probably a bit more low hanging fruit there to be taken. Because if you're in contact, it's about figuring out how to finish that contact with a positive, maybe it's a 2 point turning kick to the body, maybe it's a break and a re-engage with hands, maybe it's finishing with a head kick or a back kick on the exit. Whatever it is, that's going to add value and increase the return on the investment of finding that entry.
Yeah, that's where the most people actually train ITF sparring, isn't it? In this combination kind of mindset where they drill combinations and they drill specific sequences of interactions of techniques. But then it's bringing that to the next level of how we can incorporate that depending on all these other variables that we have: distance, timing, ring
Mm-hmm.
position, etc., etc. So it's bringing it to the next level to be able to find out if you can really execute these in real match like conditions. And that's what we're doing, whether it's a scenario where let's see who can land the most kicks after punching sequences or things like that. It's just finding ways to facilitate how you can encourage people to bring it that little step further from the initial entry shot, or just that point fighting single shot mentality of just being able to bring it to that next level.
Yeah, absolutely. The distance management part of it coming next. And what we really are talking about here is the distance between you and your opponent. And why would you need to be able to vary and change that? So, things that we're looking at there right away is hey, if we are telling, let's say, Richie, and we're sparring, and Richie wants to land something with his front leg, well, straight away, I have to be thinking about I want the distance to be a bit longer if I want to stay on the outside of that, or maybe be able to shorten the distance so that he's having to make an adjustment just to find room to pick up his front leg. So that play that I'm going to have inside and outside of his distance is different if I'm sparring Richie or if I go and spar somebody who's 2 or 3 inches shorter, who has, a different kicking style. Richie is left-legged versus my right-legged. These kind of things all matter. And so the distance management that we're talking about here is how to, in a resisted situation, find the right range for the shots that you want to throw, and to take away your opponent's ability to get a good range on you so that their kicks can be, or their blitz, their punches can be less effective. So we're all the time looking to create scenarios where the adjustment of that distance is intrinsic to being successful in the scenario.
Yeah, and this is usually going to encompass the front leg for the most part versus the other side of whether someone's trying to get in with their own leg or try to bridge that gap and get it into a closer range with hands. So these
Yeah.
are kind of scenarios that will usually pop up this problem where people then have to be able to be proficient in this skill of either maintaining the distance, maybe closing the distance to get close, or to maintain the kind of the space that you want in between where both people have the ability to kick and punch depending on their preference. And that's going to come up as well, like we said in the very first one, of the adaptability situations where maybe you're behind and you need to
Yeah.
be able to close that distance and get in there. Or maybe you're winning and you want to extend the distance and keep your opponent back and not let them in. And that's the idea of it as well. When you train this way and both people have a scenario that they're trying to accomplish, you get to experience both sides of the coin, which is very important, obviously, because you get to try them, but also trying to solve the problems of the other person and what they're thinking allows you to be more proficient in it as well. So it's like if you play football and you're a defender, but then you get to also be an attacker, you get to understand the kind of the areas and the sneaky tactics that you can use to manipulate the defenders, which helps you
Mm-hmm.
as a defender. So that's obviously the importance of that as well.
Absolutely. The next thing we've got is that weapon of mass destruction. You have it or you don't, the front leg. So if you know your opponent has a better front leg, they're more dynamic with it, they're able to utilize it more effectively. That's almost like them having that super weapon. You either have to find a way to neutralize it, take it away from them, turn it to their disadvantage, or you need to work on your own so that yours balances it out and it becomes a neutral, or even you're better than your opponent. So all sparring training at the moment should probably involve a scenario with the front leg. At least every session something has to include the front leg, and the reason for that is either you're going to be the person waving that as a threat, or you're going to be up against someone who can. So
Yeah.
one way or the other, whether it's your threat or your opponent's, you're going to have to deal with the front leg. So all of the scenarios that you create have to give some consideration to it.
Yeah, the more we can practice these engagements where both people are kind of working off that front leg as at least the initial entry shot, and then that will establish the ability to control or score or disrupt your opponent based on what you want to do. But like the very least, you need to understand how to take that away from your partner or opponent, and also maybe to be able to disrupt. So maybe you might not have the best front leg in the world, but maybe you can use your front leg to disrupt your partner or opponent from being very effective with theirs. And that's kind of where you want to be at a minimum. And then on the flip side of that, you want to be able to use your front leg to be able to control different things. We spoke about distance, we spoke about rhythm earlier. All these things are very, very encompassing of the front leg as well, how you can use that to get into your front entry shot, number one, and then whether you're going to be following on from that, getting to hands or looking for combinations or high value scores.
And an interesting segue then into one of the things that can neutralize those front legs is being good with hands. But Richie, you have a phrase that you like to use often, which is if you're all about the punching of the hands, you can't afford to be outworked. So you have to outwork your opponent when you go to hands, right?
Absolutely, because the scores are just way higher return for kicks, especially head kicks. So if I'm a puncher and Adrian is a very good kicker, I have to completely outwork him and dominate him on a ratio of at least 4-1. Because if he gets that one kick, he's back in the game, and now all of a sudden it's 4-3 and it's very close again. So for me to be ahead, I need to have a really good ratio, outwork my opponent, get really clear entries and scores on the board that my partner cannot score while I do so. So you do need to be very proficient in this area as well. Again, on both sides of the coin, whether you're a kicker, whether you're a puncher, you need to understand both sides. And the more you can understand and put yourself in these situations, the better for you.
And when it comes to this kind of attacking and counterfighting, one of the interplays that we're going to have is always going to be that hands versus legs thing. So it's something that people need to put into their scenario work. So whether that is jamming, closing down, or countering the front leg using the hands, whether it's using the hands directly as an attack that your opponent is going to have to defend, possibly with legs, putting the two and pitching the two against each other and letting people explore those scenarios is a great way to help understand both sides of that coin, whatever your preference happens to be. And then we can start to, as you said, see, hey, if someone does prefer hands, or they feel that they're more successful with hands, they get to learn about that work rate that they're going to have to put out.
Yeah.
The next
Definitely.
one
And
is,
then that also as well, Adrian, links up with what we said. Taking that a step further, maybe you're not just looking to get the hands, but getting the hands and then finishing with a kick to the
yeah,
body. So we spoke about the high value scores and the combinations, etc. This is just step one of the process. Once you kind of are comfortable and have a lot of experience in this realm, then you want to take it up a notch and always think about where you can bring it to the next level.
yeah, very, very, very true. Our next topic is very strategic. It's got everything to do with the way that the ITF fights international competition currently run, and it's the idea of the restarts. So we know that in a 2 minute round, you're probably going to have 6 to 7 restarts. That's 12 to 14 in a 2 by 2 minute round at international level. So you better have some good, uh, let's just say what's important now mentality when it comes to those restarts. You have to have a plan each time you come back into it. So the more you practice throwing yourself into that restart scenario with a live opponent in a real situation in the dojang, the better you're going to deal with that in the live sparring environment in a competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And ideally with a person in between who's acting as a referee as well, because that's actually a big factor of it. And also depending on the ring positioning, usually restart will happen because you've left the ring or you've fallen over. So your ring position may not be ideal. So to be able to work on that, work on reversals of position from restarts also. That is something I think we're probably, obviously there's people talking about this, but we're probably the first people to shine a light on the importance of restarts in the
Mm,
modern game of ITF, I think, because we have seen it from the stats, from the amount of fights that we study and do a little bit of research and analysis on Fight Chat Friday. We are really seeing the importance of the fighters who can kind of have a little bit of a strategy and a little bit of a know-how when it comes to restarts, just have an understanding of what they want to do from the position rather than just going with the flow and seeing what happens. Usually those people kind of come out 50-50 as you'd expect, where other
mm,
people have a little bit of a strategy where they're really maximizing the restarts, which happens so often. It's like, again, going back to a football analogy, if there are lots of corners happening in a soccer match, you want to be able to be having a strategy there of how you can really maximize that, not just going in hoping for the best that you'll be able to have a good outcome.
yeah, they almost are like, as you said, a set play. One of the other controllables that we talk about that really does need work is your ability to control the ring. And that's your position and your opponent's position in the ring relative to one another. The reason for that is we know that scores are clearer when it's coming from the inside of the ring pressing out. So it's much easier to see a score, would say, much easier for more judges to see a score when you're towards the middle of the ring. And it's much easier to get that warning for pushing the person out of the ring or having them leave the ring or fall down if they're towards the edge of the ring. It increases the pressure on them. That's not to say you'll never want to do any work on the edge of the ring. It's really important to practice being in both positions and see what you enjoy about both. But what tools are going to be useful? How do you control your opponent's position relative to you? And how do you get yourself out of bad positions, like being stuck in a corner, being caught with 1 foot outside of the ring in a kind of a static position, or having a restart one mat from the edge of the ring? So these are things that you really do need to practice and have in your scenarios, I think, in a lot of training sessions.
Yeah, and a very easy way you can go about that is actually spar in a ring, a designated space when you're training. A lot of people don't do it, and it's obvious that not everybody has the luxury of particular space either.
Yeah,
You know, it depends on the area you train and what your dojang looks like, but not everybody has that luxury. But that is a very good place to start, and having consequences for exiting the ring, whatever this scenario or situation you're training in. Is there a consequence for you stepping out of the ring? Do you lose a score? Do you have to do an exercise? Or just having that in people's mentality stops them from stepping out without having any consequence. And because that's something that you don't want to bring at the high level of competition, because we can see that it has big consequences, especially in very close matches. It really does come down to the importance of warnings as well.
absolutely. We have all encountered this position where you are behind, and you need to create a score or get a big value score under time pressure. So the kinds of things that you can do maybe to start to practice for that: have a countdown, have a time to action, so that by the time the clock goes from 10 to 1, you have to have achieved a score. Or every time you get a score, the clock restarts, you have to score again. Maybe we look at how do you get 2 points or 3 points in 15, 20 seconds, whatever it happens to be. And when you look at those kind of things, people will very quickly start to realize that just going for it isn't the most effective strategy, that you usually do actually need to set up your score, or maybe have, look at the value of 2 lower value scores to get that high value score, as opposed to looking for that one head kick. You might be looking to get to hands and finish with a turning kick to the body, as an example, and it's a different thing for each person.
Very, very important. It comes into most matches, unless somebody is dominating completely. It probably will come down to a 3 or 4 point match with the last maybe 40 seconds left. The mistake most people have with this is they leave it too late and there's not enough time on the clock and your opponent has a warning to spare. They can step out. So we do need to be able to train this as well, to be able to recognize when it's time to get going. And you do need an ace up your sleeve. What's the type of shot that you need when you need a high value score? Are you able to go and get that and put that on your opponent to be able to come back with a high return? So we have to simulate this scenario as well, where one partner is slightly ahead, and also warnings might come into play to this as well, and the other person needs to catch up and get a good score. And that also comes into the decision making that you need to have as well. Not going gung-ho right away, maybe. That is another luxury if you have a little bit of time on your side. So using this scenario and this situation and training here also promotes the flip side of that as well. Whereas if you're winning and you have a nice lead and you don't want to give it away in the dying seconds, it also helps you promote to be able to practice that as well.
For sure. So one of those things that comes up in the dying seconds the whole time is the issue of warnings. So how many warnings are you carrying going into the last 30 seconds, 20 seconds of a match? And we know that you have generally better outcomes out of your sparring matches if you have 5 or less warnings across the 2 2-minute rounds. So being conscious and creating scenarios where you're conscious of the warnings, you have to pay attention to the warnings, is a very, very good training exercise or tool to use, so that you're used to paying attention to it and you don't accidentally find yourself on 9, 10, 11 warnings, at the end of 2 2-minute rounds, just because you haven't paid attention.
Yeah, a lot of time at the very high level, when it's very cagey and there's not a lot of volume happening in a match, people can win just on the warnings and they'll just squeeze their opponent out, trying to just cover up. No real big scores involved. And all of a sudden it comes down to the warnings very much so. So to be able to do that, to be able to also not concede warnings, again, links into the ring positioning we spoke about earlier. Very, very important skill that you need to be able to do, and you need to practice it as well. Again, that's the importance of training within a ring, and ideally with somebody in between to be able to kind of negotiate what happens with warnings, etc. So the awareness is really part one.
Absolutely. And one more in the kind of the triumvirate of things that you can do that just tend to improve your odds of winning is improve your work rate. So the idea of limiting the amount of warnings that you're going to be conceding, that was really, really important. Looking at your restarts, again, hugely important in figuring out, in being active in those restarts and looking at what's important next, really, really important. And finally, that work rate. And we found when we looked at this that people who took less actions throughout the match tended to have tighter scoring matches against people that maybe weren't of their caliber. So people that we would look at it and objectively say, hey, you know what, I think Richie should beat X. But if the work rate isn't high enough, Richie isn't able to express that skill differential. So although he might be more skillful, pick better shots, not get hit as much, he could still be within a point or 2 points and vulnerable to one of those, like we said, those pressure scores at the end where Richie does something innocuous and all of a sudden there's a head kick and then it's over. Or he has that second warning, there's a single point score and an exit that goes to 2 point score. Now the match is level and we're into overtime. So having that higher work rate allows you to express a skill differential where it's there.
Yeah, and also Adrian spoke about last week the mental side of this as well, the mental fatigue and concentration and the importance of that. especially at the high level when both people are really good. Making those decisions under pressure when you're tired is not easy. So you have to be able
Mhm.
to live in that environment as well and also thrive there. And if it's your first time being able to be in that environment when you're in the fire of it at a final of a competition, that's not a good place to be. So you want to be able to replicate that as well, and to be able to have that confidence in your back pocket that you can live in the fire of this whole thing. And that's what you're looking at really. So like, how can you replicate that and how you're going to feel, and just managing that as well, because you don't want to overdo it. There's certain times in of the training season that you want to do this a little bit more than others, and you want to have a little bit of a structure to this as well. So being
Yeah,
able to have the concentration, to be able to last the whole duration of the tournament, being able to last the whole duration of 2 rounds, and to be able to have a high level that you want to be able to execute is the importance there that we're really trying to hit home.
for sure. So, folks, those are 10 scenarios, 10 mentalities almost, or 10 things that you can look at in your sparring training. And the way we look at this is when you choose how to spend your time in your sparring training within your dojang, if you're not addressing some of these in the session, there's probably a more efficient way you could spend your time. Make sure you're spending your time on the things that are going to matter in the spar under competition stresses and in a competition environment, and it'll be much more beneficial for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's much more to just the techniques. That's what we see as the end product, but there's so many other variables that go into a successful performance in ITF sparring. Here are 10. If you just nailed in the 10 of those, you will be very, very successful. So we tried to nail it down into the most important ones. Of course, there's other ones involved as well, but I think these ones will get you a long, long way.
Excellent. Folks, that's us for this Friday. We will see you next week. Bye now.
See you in the next one.